Hello, everyone, and welcome to another segment of Voices of Empowerment with Dr. B. I am your girl, Dr. B. Welcome. We are airing live on all of the platforms as we do every single time we go live, every Tuesday and Sunday, right here on TikTok and YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Clubhouse, the OG Triple OG Clubhouse. Okay. And I want to thank you for your presence, for your time, for spending time with us during our collective readings. We actually come here twice a week to read through some phenomenal books that we are learning from, we are advancing in, we're elevating through. And in this case, we're facing some harsh truths. Okay. This book that we're reading through is Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, written by Isabel Wilkerson. And when I tell you, this right here, it is not playing with us. Here's the thing, and I say this every time we come on here. In order for we all have desires and where we want to go. In this case, this is talking about culturally, it's talking about individually, as a people, as a person, as a being, as a human, as a community, as a culture, as a nation. But it's also reminding us of where we came from. This is literally bringing up the origins of where this cancer called segregation, racism, all of that stuff, just the division of the whole thing, where it all began. And it was very eye-opening because it's not just African Americans or indigenous people. She's highlighting every caste worldwide. And man, oh man, oh man, this thing is, it's been, I've had sessions where I've come on here and I've read chapters because we do one chapter a session. And I'm barely able to make it through the chapter because I'm in full on tears. You know why? Because when we get to the part about African Americans and indigenous people, which I am both, it's both in my blood, I can't help but to see and feel my ancestors. And she's detailed in this thing, man. And it's harsh, but it's necessary because especially in this time of erasure, of mass erasure, okay? Because our origins and the story of our origins and where our people came from and what they had to deal with is being wiped out. Why? Because there's a huge need for the others to be able to spin the narrative and make themselves look like the bright lights and the positive people, when no. They were the reasons why our people and other nations and people suffered the way that they did and are continually suffering today in one aspect or another. So I can appreciate Isabel for opening our eyes and having the bravery and the courage to discuss it in raw. Oh my God, it's a lot, but it's necessary because we can't heal what we won't reveal. You know what I mean? And we can't heal what we're scared to face. You gotta come face to face with those dark shadows of our past, of our now, in order to know where we're going and have a clarity about the future. Okay. So today we're going through chapters. I think this is just part 4. It is part 4, which is entitled Part 4 and Chapter 11, forgive me, Dominant Group Status Threat and the Precarity of the Highest Rung. Okay. At any point that you hear something that stands out to you, or whatever the case resonates, and you just want to share your thoughts or whatever you need to share, use the chat, use the comment section, and I'll periodically I'll go and look at the sections and whatever the case and give voice to your words, because I don't want anybody to be overlooked and dismissed and things like that from whatever platform you're listening and viewing from. Okay. Alrighty, you all, without further ado, Chapter 11, Dominant Group Status Threat and the Precarity of the Highest Rung. In late 2015, 2 economists at Princeton University announced the startling revelation that the death rates of middle-aged white Americans, especially less educated white Americans in midlife, had risen for the first time since 1950. The perplexing results of the study on mortality rates in the United States sounded alarms on the front pages of newspapers and at the top of news feeds across the nation. The surge in early deaths among middle aged white people went counter to the trends of every other ethnic group in America. Even historically marginalized Black and Latino Americans had seen their mortality rates fall during the time period studied from 1998 to 2013. The rise in the white race death was at odds with prevailing trends in the rest of the Western world. Americans had enjoyed increasing longevity the previous century with each succeeding generation due to healthier lifestyles and advancements in medicine. But starting just before the turn of the 21st century, the death rates among middle aged white Americans, ages 45 to 54, began to rise as the least educated, in particular, succumbed to suicide, drug overdoses, and liver disease from alcohol abuse, according to the authors of the seminal study, Caste and Nobel laureate Angus Deaton. These deaths of despair, as the economists, called them, accounted for the loss of some 500,000 white Americans during that period, more than the number of American soldiers who died during World War II. These are people who might still be alive had this group kept to previous generational trends. These are deaths that do not have to happen, Case said at a conference on equality. These are people who are taking their lives either slowly or quickly. The worsening numbers were persistent and large enough to drive up white mortality rates overall and to outweigh the gains in longevity for advances in the treatment of cancer and heart disease. The turnabout reversed decades of progress in mortality and was unique to the United States, Case and Deaton wrote. No other rich country saw a similar turnaround. For this group of Americans, mortality rates rose at a time when rates in other Western countries had not merely dipped, but had plummeted. The rate for middle-aged white Americans rose from about 375 per 100,000 people in the late 1990s to about 415 per 100,000 in 2013, as against a fall in the UK, for example, from about 330 per 100,000 to 260 per 100,000 over the same period. A graphic of the mortality rates for leading Western nations shows an upward line for the death rates of middle-aged white Americans against the plunging lines for their counterparts in fellow Western countries. What could account for the worsening prospects of this group of Americans, unique in the Western world and singular even in the United States? The authors noted that since the 1970s, real wages had stagnated for blue-collar workers, leading to economic insecurity and to a generation less well off than previous ones. But they acknowledged that similar stagnation had occurred in other Western countries. They noted that comparable Western countries had a more generous safety net that could offer protections not available in the United States. Yet white Americans would not be the only group affected by wage stagnations and a thin safety net. Blue-collar workers of other backgrounds would be equally at risk from the uncertainties of the economy, if not more so. Black death rates have been historically higher than those of other groups, but even their mortality rates were falling year by year. It was white Americans at midlife who were dying of despair in rising numbers. In caste terms, these are the least well off, most precariously situated members of the dominant caste in America. For generations, they could take for granted their inherited rank in the hierarchy and the benefits that accrued from it. We may underestimate, though, the aftershocks of a shift in the demographics, the erosion of labor unions, the perceived loss of status, the fears about their place in the world, and resentment that the kind of security their fathers could rely upon might now be waning in what were supposed to be the best years of their lives. Rising immigration from across the Pacific and the Rio Grande and the ascendance of Black men as president made for an inversion of the world as many had known it. And some of them might have been more susceptible to the calls to take our country back after 2008 and to make America great again in 2016, now again in 2020. In America, political scientists have given this melee of insecurities a name: dominant group status threat. This phenomenon is not the usual form of prejudice or stereotyping that involves looking down on outgroups who are perceived to be inferior, writes Diana Mutz, a political scientist at the University of Pennsylvania. Instead, it is born of a sense that the outgroup is doing too well and thus is a viable threat to one's own dominant group status. The victims of these deaths of despair are in the same category of people whom centuries ago the colonial elites elevated as they created the caste system. The planters bestowed higher status on European yeomen and those of the lower classes to create a new American category known as white. In earlier times, even those who owned no slaves, wrote the white Southern author W.J. Cash, clung to the dear treasure of their superiority as a white man, which had been conferred on him by slavery, and so was determined to keep the black man in chains. By the middle of the 20th century, the white working class American, wrote the white Southern author Lillian Smith, has not only been neglected and exploited, he has been fed little except the scraps of skin color and white supremacy as spiritual nourishment. Working class whites, the preeminent social economist Gunnar Myrdal wrote, need the demarcation of caste more than upper class whites. They are the people likely to stress aggressively that no Negro can ever attain the status of even the lowest white. In a psychic way, the people dying of despair could be said to be dying of the end of an illusion, an awakening to the holes in an article of faith that an inherited unspoken superiority, a natural deservedness over subordinate caste would assure their place in the hierarchy. They had relied on this illusion, perhaps beyond the realm of consciousness, and perhaps needed it more than any other group in a forbiddingly competitive society in which downward social mobility was a constant fear, the historian David Rodiger wrote. One might lose everything, but not whiteness. In the midst of the Great Depression, the scholar W.E.B. Du Bois observed that working class white Americans had bought into the compensation of a public and psychological wage, as he put it. They were given public deference and titles of courtesy because they were white. They had accepted the rough uncertainties of laboring class life in exchange for the caste system's guarantee that no matter what befell them, they would never be on the very bottom. The American caste system, which co-opted this class of white workers nearly from the start, drove such a wedge between black and white workers that there probably are not today in the world two groups of workers with practically identical interests, who are kept so far apart that neither sees anything of common interest, Du Bois wrote. These insecurities extend back for centuries. A Virginia slaveholder remarked in 1832 that poor whites had little but their complexion to console them for being born into a higher caste. When a hierarchy is built around the needs of the group to which one happens to have been born, it can distort the perception of one place in the world. It can create an illusion that one is innately superior to others, if only because it has been reinforced so often that it becomes accepted as subconscious truth. Nobody could take away from you this whiteness that made you and your way of life superior, Lillian Smith wrote. They could take your house, your job, your fun. They could steal your wages, keep you from acquiring knowledge. They could tax your vote or cheat you out of it. They could by arousing your anxieties make you impotent, but they could not strip your white skin off of you. It became the poor white's most precious possession, a charm staving off utter dissolution. Given that the hierarchy was designed for the benefit of the caste that created it, the basic restrictions upon marriage, occupation, and public gatherings separate the two groups into two self-perpetuating castes in such a way that the white group is assured the higher privileges and fuller opportunities, wrote the anthropologists W. Lloyd Warner and Allison Davis, of a bipolar caste system exemplified by the Jim Crow South. This affords the dominant caste a tremendous gain in psychological security as a result of their categorically defined superiority of status. Things began to change in the 1960s when civil rights legislation opened labor markets to women of all races. to immigrants from beyond Europe, and to African Americans whose life and death protests helped unlock doors for all of these groups. New people flooded the labor pool at the precise moment that manufacturing was on the decline, and every worker now faced greater competition. In the span of a few cruel years, wrote the New York Times columnist Russell Baker in the 1960s of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, he has seen his comfortable position as the in man of American society become a social liability as the outcast and the exploited have presented their due bills on their conscience. Some people from the groups that were said to be inherently inferior managed to make it into the mainstream, a few rising to the level of people in the dominant caste. One of them, in 2008, rising to the highest station in the land. This left some white working class Americans, in particular, those with the least education and the material security that it can confer, to face the question of whether the commodity that they could take for granted, their skin and ascribed race, might be losing value. There had always been a subordinate caste, and everyone knew who the subordinate caste was and had positioned themselves accordingly. Always the Negro was something you had to prove you were better than, Lillian Smith wrote of the white working class dilemma, and you couldn't prove it. No, you couldn't prove it. The beliefs and assumptions had all contributed to a collective madness, and it is that which feeds on half lies and quarter truths and dread. Those in the dominant caste who found themselves lagging behind those seen as inherently inferior potentially faced an epic existential crisis. To stand on the same rung as those perceived to be of a lower caste is seen as lowering one's status. In the zero-sum stakes of a caste system upheld by perceived scarcity, if a lower caste person goes up a rung, an upper caste person comes down. The elevation of others amount to the demotion of oneself. Thus, equality feels like a demotion. If the lower caste person manages actually to rise above an upper caste person, the natural human response from someone weaned on their caste's inherent superiority is to perceive a threat to their existence, a heightened sense of unease, of displacement, of fear for their very survival. If the things that I have believed are not true, then might I not be who I thought I was? The disaffection is more than economic. The melee and spiritual, psychological, emotional. Who are you if there is no one to be better than? Wow, 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 wow. Man, okay, I'm going to read that again. If the things that I have believed are not true, then might I not be who I thought I was? First of all, that's a bar. And that can go across the board, okay? Whether it's religious, that can go across the board. The disaffection is more than economic. The melee is spiritual, psychological, and emotional. Who are you if there is no one to be better than? Wow. It's a great lie on which their identity has been built, said Dr. Sushruth Jadhav, a preeminent Indian psychiatrist based in London who specializes in the effects of caste on mental health. Thus, a caste system makes a captive of everyone within it, just as the assumptions of inferiority weigh on those assigned to the bottom of the caste system. The assumptions of superiority can burden those at the top with unsustainable expectations of needing to be several rungs above, in charge at all times, at the center of things, to police those who might cut ahead of them, to resent the idea of undeserving lower caste jumping the line and getting in front of those born to lead. His whole life is one anxious effort to preserve his caste, wrote the Dalit leader Bimroa Ambedkar of the dominant caste. Caste is his precious possession, which he must save at any cost. My goodness, man. When people have lived with assumptions long enough, passed down through the generations as incontrovertible fact, okay, they are accepted as the truths of psychics, no longer needing even it to be spoken. They are as true as unremarkable as water flowing through rivers, or the air that we breathe. In the original caste system of India, The abiding faith in the entitlement of birth became enmeshed in the mind of the upper caste and hangs there to this day without any support, Ambakar wrote. For now, it needs no prop but belief, like a weed on the surface of a pond. The anxieties of the least secure in the dominant caste are not unlike those of a firstborn child expected to take over the family business. Right. He may have neither the interest nor the specialized aptitude for it, but feels duty bound, pressured to take the reins, even though a younger sibling, say a sister, is the one who was always good with numbers and has a temperament to run things, but is not considered because of the family hierarchy of who goes first and who inherits what. This creates unsustainable expectation in a culture that proclaims to be egalitarian but was set up for certain people to dominate by birth. Custom and law segregated the white working and middle classes for so long that most would not have been in a position to see firsthand the headwinds confronting disfavored Americans. The hand of government in the lives of white citizens has often been made invisible and has left distortions as to how each group got to where they are, allowing resentments and rivalries to fester. Many may not have realized that the New Deal reforms of the 1930s, like the Social Security Act of 1935, providing old age insurance, and the Wagner Act, protecting workers from labor abuse, excluded the vast majority of Black workers, farm laborers, and domestics at the urging of Southern white politicians. Further tipping the scales, the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, was created to make home ownership easier for white families by guaranteeing mortgages in white neighborhoods while specifically excluding African Americans who wished to buy homes. It did so by refusing to back mortgages in any neighborhood where Black people live, a practice known as redlining, and by encouraging or even requiring restrictive covenants that barred Black citizens from buying homes in white neighborhoods. That still happens today, by the way. Together, these and other government programs extended a safety net and a leg up to the parents, grandparents, and great grandparents of white Americans of today, while shutting out the foreparents of African Americans from those same job protections and those same chances to earn and build wealth. These government programs for the dominant caste were enforced during the lifetimes of many current day Americans. These programs did not open to African Americans until the late 1960s, and then only after the protests for civil rights. The more recent forms of state sanctioned discrimination, along with denying pay to enslaved people over the course of generations, has led to a wealth gap in which white families currently have 10 times the wealth of their Black counterparts. If you are not Black, and if you and your parents were alive in the 1960s and got a mortgage, wrote Ben Mathis Lilly in Slate, you benefited directly and materially from discrimination. The very machinery upon which many white Americans had the chance to build their lives and assets was forbidden to African Americans who were still just a generation or two out of enslavement and the apartheid of Jim Crow. Burdens so heavy and borne for so long that if they were to rise, they would have to work and save that much harder than their fellow Americans. Rather than encouraging a greater understanding of how these disparities came to be or a framework for compassion for fellow Americans, political discourse has usually reinforced prevailing stereotypes of a lazy, inferior group getting undeserved handouts, a scapegoating that makes the formal barriers all the more unjust, and the resentments of white working class citizens of all more tragic. The subordinate caste was shut out of the trillions of dollars of wealth accumulated through the appreciation of housing assets secured by federally insured loans between 1932 and 1962. A major source of current day wealth, wrote the sociologist George Lipsitz. Yet they find themselves portrayed as privileged beneficiaries of special preferences by the very people who profit from their exploitation and oppression. Once labor, housing, and schools finally began to open up to the subordinate caste, many working and middle class whites began to perceive themselves to be worse off by comparison and to report that they experienced more racism than African Americans, unable to see the inequalities, the inequities that persist often in their favor. This is interesting. And again, I'm seeing the parallels because it's happening still to this day. May not be as blatant and outright, but it's still happening nonetheless. It is still happening nonetheless. My goodness, man. Next section, unconscious bias, a mutation in the software. For the end of the 20th century, social scientists found new ways to measure what had transformed from overt racism to a slow boil of unspoken antagonism that social scientists called unconscious bias. This was not the cross burning, the epithet spewing biological racism of the pre civil rights era, but rather discriminatory behaviors based on subconscious prejudgments by people who professed and believed in equality. By adulthood, researchers have found most Americans have been exposed to a culture with enough negative messages about African Americans and other marginalized groups that as much as 80% of the white Americans hold unconscious bias against Black Americans. Bias so automatic that it kicks in before a person can process it. According to the Harvard sociologist David R. Williams, the messaging is so pervasive in American society that a third of Black Americans hold anti-Black bias against themselves. My goodness. All racial ethnic minority groups are stereotyped more negatively than whites, Williams said. Blacks are viewed the worst, then Latinos, who are viewed twice as negatively as Asians. There is a hierarchy of rank. What kind of person is likely to carry this kind of unconscious bias? This is a wonderful person, Williams said, who has sympathy for the bad things that have happened in the past. But that person is still an American and has been fed the larger stereotypes of Blacks that are deeply embedded in the culture of this society. So, despite holding no explicit racial prejudices, they nonetheless hold implicit biases that's deep in their subconscious. They have all these negative images of African Americans so that when they meet an African American, although self consciously they are not prejudiced, the implicit biases nonetheless operate to shape their behavior. This discriminatory behavior is activated more quickly and effortlessly than conscious discrimination, more quickly than saying, I've decided to discriminate against this person. This is the frightening point, he said, because it's an automatic process and it's an unconscious process. People who engage in this unthinking discrimination are not aware of it. They're not lying to you when they say, I didn't treat this person differently and I treat everyone the same. They mean it because consciously that is the way they see themselves. These implicit biases shape their behavior in ways they are not even aware of. The research suggests that about 70 to 80% of whites fall into this category. I agree because it spins comments like, oh no, I'm not racist. I have 3 Black friends. I'm not racist. I hang with my coworkers who are Black, Yeah. These automatic responses contribute to disparities in hiring, in housing, in education, and in medical treatment for the lower caste people compared to their dominant caste counterparts, and, as with other aspects of the caste system, often go against logic. For example, a pioneering study by the sociologist Deva Pager found that white felons applying for a job were more likely to get hired than African Americans with no criminal record. In the life and death world of medicine, African Americans and other marginalized people are granted fewer procedures and poorer quality care than whites across every therapeutic intervention, said Williams, who specializes in biases in public health. That is so true. Of the 60 most common procedures reimbursed by Medicare, he said, African Americans receive fewer procedures than white patients, even though they have a higher rate of illness. The only procedures that African Americans receive at higher rates than whites, Williams said, are shunts for renal disease, the removal of stomach tissue for ulcers, leg amputation, and the removal of testicles. Jesus. Bias does not contain the damage it inflicts to one group, however. One tragic form of unconscious bias has had the unintended effect of unwittingly protecting the disfavored caste of African Americans and Latinos from a scourge that has brought untold heartache to many white Americans. Empirical studies have found that physicians often disregard the reports of pain from Black and Latino patients, wrongly believing that African Americans in particular have higher pain thresholds. This has led physicians to undertreat or deny pain medications to Black patients, even those with metastatic cancer, while readily prescribing medication to white patients reporting equivalent levels of pain. The disparity is so severe that African Americans as a group receive pain medication at levels beneath the thresholds established by the World Health Organization. Just as pollutants don't confine themselves to the air around a factory, this single caste inequality has spared no one. The undertreatment of the subordinate caste leaves them to suffer needlessly, and the overtreatment of the dominant caste may have contributed to the rising mortality rate for white Americans who become addicted to opioids. Worse still, society was less prepared for the opioid crisis that it then it might have been had then it might have been had it not missed the chance to build a comprehensive framework for dealing with substance abuse in the 1990s, when it was the subordinate caste that was in need of help. The crack cocaine epidemic of that era was dismissed as an urban crime problem rather than addressed as a social and health crisis, considered a Black problem rather than a human one. Not to mention, it was a Black problem that was caused by the white counterparts who planted the crack cocaine in the marginalized and urban communities. Okay, it's a different conversation. The response was to criminalize addiction when the abusers were subordinate castes, which swelled the rate of mass incarceration. Exactly. Broke up families and left the country ill equipped for the incoming tragedy of opioid addiction. Caste assumptions created devastation on both sides of the caste divide and have made for a less generous society overall. Exclusion costs lives up and down the hierarchy. The physician Jonathan M. Meltz, who has conducted research into the health of disaffected whites in Middle America, has measured the life and death consequences of state decisions to withhold benefits seen as helping presumably undeserved minority groups. In the state of Tennessee, for example, he found that restrictive health policies may have cost the lives of as many as 4,599 African Americans between 2011 and 2015, but also cost the lives of as many as 12,013 white Tennesseans, more than double the loss sustained by Black residents. Especially with Tennessee. Speaking of Tennessee, they just enforced new laws here recently that if the physician does not agree with any aspect of you, whether it's your race, your lifestyle, or your religion, or whatever the case, they have the right to deny you treatment. That just happened. And what's crazy is I just relocated to Tennessee a month ago, okay? But it's okay because I am a practitioner. And so in this time, there's a need for myself as well as others. So I'm here on purpose for sure. Continuing to read, in his book, Dying of Whiteness, Meltz told of the case of a 41-year-old white taxi driver who was suffering from an inflamed liver that threatened the man's life. Because the Tennessee legislator had neither taken up the Affordable Care Act nor expanded Medicaid coverage, the man was not able to get the expensive life-saving treatment that would have been available to him had he lived just across the border in Kentucky. As he approached death, he stood by the conviction that he did not want the government involved. No way I want my tax dollars paying for Mexicans or welfare queens. Man, wait a minute. This white man about to die. Okay. And was not, because he lives in Tennessee, was not given the coverage and the provisions and things like that. He says No, this man said on in pain and on his way to death. No way I want my tax dollars paying for Mexicans or welfare queens. The man told Mills. Man, right. Ashe, Ashe said on Clubhouse, good riddance. Thank you. I mean, I hate it, but hey, and so it is. Okay. Ain't he says he continues to say, ain't no way I would ever support Obamacare or sign up for it. I would rather die. And sadly, so he would. Jeez Louise, man. That is insane. That's how deeply embedded that disease is. Sadly, sadly, so said the author. Sadly, and sadly, he would. Yeah, that is sad. That's sad that your arrogance and your pride and your prejudice and your racism is so deeply embedded in you to where you would rather hold on to that than to free yourself and get healed. Okay? That is so crazy. I know someone right now, this just happened yesterday, who works at the front desk of a hotel in Chicago. She's a black woman. Do you know a white guest came in to check in, and because she was black, they refused to give her their credit card to check in and asked, was there a white person that can check them in? Yep. Did not want her touching his card, did not want her touching his paper to give him the receipt, nothing. Yep. That was just yesterday. Okay. In Chicago. But if you watch Sinners, you heard Michael B. Jordan as I think he was, I forget which brother he was playing. But he said Chicago because that was one of the places that, a lot of the sharecroppers and formerly enslaved African American and indigenous people migrated to in the Great Migration. My family being one. They were actually the setting of the movie Sinners. Clarksdale, Mississippi, is where my people are from. Kahona County, which is where the tribe, the Choctaw Native Americans resided. Okay, so before it was called Mississippi, it was Kahoma territory. Okay, that's where my people are from. So, but with that being said, they migrated to Chicago, and the statement that was said about this was Chicago is a none but Mississippi with tall buildings instead of plantations. And that is so very true. So very true. Because racism is very prominent there as well in certain places. Still, in this year, 2025, this just happened yesterday, like I said. This is something else, man. This book is harsh truth, but it's truth that we need. We so need it, man. We so need it. So, with that being said, we're going to pause for now. You all know how we do. We do one chapter at a time. That was the end of chapter 11. Sunday, we will go into chapter 12, which is entitled A Scapegoat to Bear the Sins of the World. A scapegoat to bear the sins of the world, okay? I am curious to know what that is about, but we will see on Sunday. Now, listen, if you do not have your copy of this book, it is a PDF copy. It is every piece of literature that we have here that we go through and read together. It's always free to you. Yes, we are a nonprofit organization, 501c2, accept donations, but they are, although welcome, they are not required. Okay, you can get whatever piece of literature that we're reading through now, or anyone that we've previously read. It's still available to you. Simply got to let me know. Send me an email, request it, send me an email that you want, or send me a message with the email that you want me to forward your literature to, and you'll have it. That way you can read it. Okay, Ashe, no worries. Send me a message, okay? Send me a message and let me know your email address. That way I can send it over to you, and you can read it along. We would love to have you to read it along with us or you can read it at your own leisure. But I do suggest that you read it. Anybody under the sound of my voice. Again, we're airing live on Clubhouse, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, all of the things, okay? And so from any platform, wherever you're viewing and listening from, definitely let me know, okay? Okay. I'm writing it down, Ashe. That way I don't miss it, okay? And as soon as we get off of here, I will send it right over to you so that you can have it. And if you did not catch the first couple of lives, because we're about to go into on Sunday chapter 12, okay? So you missed quite a bit, all right? So take the time, read through it. It's gonna be rough. I'm not gonna lie. It's gonna be rough. However, it's needed, right? It's needed. You may need to breathe through a couple of sections. You may need to put it down and walk away and kind of give yourself a break because it is heavy, very much so heavy. Be kind to yourself. Don't force yourself to go through it, so quickly just to catch up. We have the rest of this evening. Yeah, you say you're not a lightweight. Okay, I listen. Hey, I can only suggest. I can't make you do now. You know your thug level. Okay, so knowing your thug level, that's what's up. Go right ahead. Do your thing. Do your thing. You do your thing. Okay. All righty. But with that being said, you all, we're going to conclude tonight. I do welcome you to go to my website, and you can visit it. For those on Clubhouse, it's right above my head. Tap there, and I started stuttering all of a sudden. Tap there and go straight to the website, and you can peruse and see what's there for you. I do astrology and all of those things. You can book sessions, readings, and all of that on there. If you want, you can just go there and see all of the things, okay? Because it's a lot of stuff for you to view. All right, put yourself on the mailing list too. You'll get a email from me every month with good information, conversations, put some things on your mind, for you to think about and kind of delineate and go through on your own, okay? Alrighty, you all, with that being said, be sure to follow me too on all social media platforms. You're not gonna be upset about it. I promise you, you're gonna enjoy it. And join me tonight on TikTok, only on TikTok, for the Talk with Doc. Okay, we're having a good conversation. We're talking about tonight, how much jurisdiction do our exes have in our current life? Okay, whether it's an ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, ex-wife, ex-husband, if you got kids, pets, goldfishes together, okay, whatever the case, how much say so does your ex have in your now? Okay, we gonna talk about that. So be sure to meet us there at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, only on TikTok for the Talk with Doc. Okay, and that's on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Join us on Tuesdays and Thursdays. All right, you all. Listen, I love you. I mean it. There is absolutely positively nothing you can do about it. Don't you even try it. We will be back here on Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Voices of Empowerment. Peace.